Are you a game master who feels a little burnt out prepping and preparing for game sessions week after week? Do you create marvelous worlds, fantastic NPCs, and intricate mysteries with juicy plot points for your players, only to have your hard work put on hiatus due to a scheduling issue with your group? Whether you need a break from prep or always want a viable option when certain gamers are missing from your scheduled game night, GM-less tabletop games might be just what you need. Keep listening to discover my top 5 GM-less RPGs to soothe your achy breaky heart. Welcome to Claim to Game. We help tabletop gamers have a great time with friends to experience amazing stories. It can be overwhelming to start and run great games. Let's make it easier for you to play any game you want to have fun with your friends. I'm Clint.scheirer. I've helped thousands of students in my career find their way to better themselves and better their game. With more than 10 years experience in leadership, coaching, live performance, and public speaking, I know I can help you create immersive, low-stress games you'll never forget. It's time for you to make your claim to game. Hello and welcome back to episode 35, season 2 of Claim to Game, still a predominantly educational fun podcast in which I am daring to coin the word fungicational. It's like making a baking soda vinegar volcano for your 7th grade science fair project, except only super cool and not sticky or smelly at all. In our time together, you will need to go in the Wayback Machine, all the way back to episode 9 of the Claim to Game podcast, titled Should I Play with a Game Master or Go GM-less? In that episode, we weighed both the tenders, which are pros, and the toughs, cons, for GM-led games as well as the GM-less games. It was a great episode. I'll put the link in the show notes for you to go back, check it out. If you haven't listened to it already, I promise we aren't going to just rehash all the points laid out in episode 9. However, the reason I'm speaking about the top 5 GM-less games today is because episode 9 is one of my top downloaded and listened to episodes since the conception of this podcast in March of 2024. It has received 2 times the number of love than any other episode that I put out there. Why? If I were to venture a guess, it would be 2 main points that I laid out in that episode when talking about the toughs or cons for a game or any game that requires a game master. The first is GM burnout. Some GMs say that they never burn out and they wouldn't want anybody else running the games at their table, and that's totally fair. That's definitely not me. I sometimes just want to experience the role of the player. And if other players at the table are not willing to take on that mantle of GM, and your table only wants to play games that need to have a GM to lead them, well, then you're shit out of luck, friend. You either need to find a GM or your group doesn't get to play your intended game. And the second point was game session or game campaign preparation. There's many time-saving resources and tips for GMs who prepare and run campaigns. Heck, this podcast is now becoming a resource to help GMs manage themselves and their tables with the greatest of ease, like a daring young man or woman on the flying trapeze. Yet, sometimes it can just be nice to show up and play a game without spending any amount of time preparation in advance or having to expend any sort of mental energy managing the moving parts of players, NPCs, dice, math, and anything else that goes along with being a game master for a game. For this reason, I believe you and others are looking into the deep, dark void of the universe, calling out for sweet reprieve. Well, don't you worry, friend. Reprieve has come. If you are a GM who is weary and burdened, or maybe you wish to avoid the GM seat altogether for fear of burnout and too much prep, the GM-less games are here, baby! Okay, on a calmer note, I will mention that GM-less games are usually designed for one-shot games where the adventures are meant to be completed in one session. And if you're someone who wants a longer campaign played over multiple sessions, I believe that my number 1 pick has you covered. Right now, On the r/RPG subreddit, there are 30 plus GM-less games listed by the community that the community thinks are great. And I wanted to cut through this list with the community's help, so I asked the following question. Can you rank your top 5 GM-less tabletop RPGs from 1 to 5? It needs to be a game that is playable for at least 2 or more players. Now, this doesn't mean that there isn't possibly a solo mode in some of these games where you could just play by yourself without other people, but I wanted these games to be ones that a game master who maybe wants a break or somebody who doesn't want to jump into the GM seat yet would be able to pick up this game with low prep and get some friends around the table to play. And with over 12,000 views and nearly 80 responses, I've analyzed and prioritized the top 5 GM-less games, which came up time and again as the best of the best. I will put the link to that Reddit thread in the show notes if you want to look at the entire conversation. There were some games that I just couldn't include in this episode, but definitely should see the light of day, and you should check it out. I will say that if you can imagine, we are currently pouring out vinegar into our baking soda clay volcano. Time for an explosion of opportunity. We are going to begin with number 5 and end on the number 1 GM-less game. Here we go. Quick pause on the episode. Okay, I lied. Before I give you the number 5 pick for top GM-less tabletop RPGs, I just wanted to give a plug for one of my personal favorite GM-less RPGs, which unfortunately didn't make the top 5 list. Season 1 of the Claim to Game podcast focused on Goblin Quest, the RPG, by game designer Grant Howitt. Simply put, you play as green, tiny little goblins trying to succeed in a perfectly hopeless quest in a Lord of the Rings-esque setting. And in case you missed Season 1, I've helped you out. I packaged everything together and tied it with a nice little bow. In the show notes, you can find a link to access my free resource, the complete 7-episode series of How to Play Goblin Quest the RPG, and the complete 7-episode series of the rules hacks to Goblin Quest, giving you different settings, character choices, and modes of play, still using the same rules as Goblin Quest. Picture yourself pretending to be gross, grotty little buggers on your next game night with your closest friends. You'll be wreaking havoc all over the Great Battle Camp in no time. Thanks, and now back to the episode. Number 5 on our list of top GM-less tabletop RPGs is Polaris, the role-playing game. Shout out and much thanks to RPGNet reviewer Aaron Stone. He took a peek at this game back in 2006, and his words enlightened my brain nuggets on how Polaris is played. So thanks, Aaron. This game has unique takes on narrative stakes and structured tragic themes. Created by Black Book Editions, the story will revolve around a post-apocalyptic sci-fi setting where wars and climatic catastrophes have ravaged the surface of Earth, making it uninhabitable to all but mutated monsters. Humanity, searching for refuge, combs the world's oceans and finds sanctuary in the frickin' North Pole. The game's main city is at the top of the world, and it's called Polaris. There's also a king, also with the name of Polaris, so don't get that confused. A queen is also there, but we don't know her name, and there is a captain of the knights and the queen's guard, Algol. The city consists of strongholds surrounding a large opening straight to hell, and the pit is called the Mistake, you think? And out of the Mistake, there are demons that are coming out trying to destroy Polaris, probably the city and the king too. Players take on the roles of the Knights Stellar, who recognize this threat, and they're trying to take on the destruction and the corruption coming out of the Mistake. And the mechanics are very interesting in how this is played without a GM. They're fascinating because each player, they are designed to be a guide for other players according to where they are sitting around the table in a circle. First, you have the heart, and this is the player who is taking on the primary storytelling role at that moment or at that scene. Then you have the mistaken, and this is the person who's directly opposite in seating position from the primary storyteller. And that person, the mistaken, is trying to introduce conflict and temptation, controls all the enemies who are opposing forces in the scene. You also have the player who's being the new moon. This is the person who is to the left of the primary storyteller, who controls the characters who are in close relationship to the primary storyteller's character, or close relationship to the heart of the scene. And lastly, you have the full moon, who controls characters who have more social or hierarchical relationships with the primary storyteller. A quick example. In a scene where the knight meets his lover, the player who is currently the heart plays the knight, the primary storyteller. The new moon plays the lover. The mistaken will try to introduce conflict into the scene, and the full moon will control any close friends. There are many more facets to this game, such as aspects, which are unique characteristics of your knight, ice, light, zeal, weariness scores, as well as the game's major play modes, which are free play, conflict, and experience. A single six-sided dice is occasionally rolled, but the game is mostly driven by player negotiation and invention. 3 to 5 players and ages 14 and up is what is recommended. However, a helpful tip from one of our Redditors said that the rules allow for 3 players, but really anybody who he or she has known to have played Polaris said that it's really best played with 4 players. So that's a word to the wise. Bottom line, this game has so much going for it, and it's only number 5 on our list. We still have 4 more to go. So put this on your list of games to put on that shelf of shame, and let's get moving on to number 4, which is The Fall of Magic. This game gets many enthusiastic endorsements and is beloved on Reddit. Why? Maybe it's the handmade scroll that reveals a landscape of locations, roads, and strange encounters. Possibly, it's the open-ended story prompts that guides players in creating a narrative to help develop a fantasy world. The handmade map scroll is 5.5 feet or about 1.6 meters. It's double-sided. It's 100% cotton, so don't shrink that bad boy in the washer and the dryer. Keep them Cheeto Dorito fingers away. No touchy. The game's initial prompt begins like this. The magic is dying, and the magus is dying with it. We travel together in the realm of Umbra, where magic was born. So it is the character's job to accompany the dying magus or sorcerer in this magical realm. One Redditor described how each session produced a uniquely immersive experience which is never the same. By the end, you develop a deep love and understanding of the other players and characters. This game is described as tactile, ritual-like in the presentation of the scroll. It seems truly enjoyable to players. It also comes with 5 metal tokens, 1 die, 12 cards, and an instruction booklet. Now, mechanically, gameplay is simple. On your turn, you choose a prompt at the location you're at on the map and answer the question. You can tell a story. You can act out a scene. You can just discuss what the answer is and what it means to you. This is the game. You keep doing this until you and the other players find the end of the story. And the first player moves the Magus token shared by all the players to a location on the map and uses the location's primary prompt to set the overall scene. On a player's turn, if they haven't yet chosen a prompt at a location, they pick one and then play out the scene. And if they've already had a scene, they can either choose to do another or decide to move the Magus along the path and answer the new location's prompt. This game is said to be good for 2 to 4 players, though I believe the consensus on Reddit is that 3 or more players is the sweet spot. It's published by Heart of Deernacord Studio and Workshop based in Olympia, Washington, and their games are focused to drive gameplay and have all players share equally in the storytelling experience. Coming in at number 3, The Quiet Year. First, I want to give credit and much thanks to Shelby DJ Bab, who left a very clear and helpful review of this game back in 2013 on RPG.net. After reading her description of the game, I not only understood it better, but I got excited about potentially using this game to allow my gaming table to create their own world and setting for another tabletop RPG system we may play. In fact, this is what some of our Reddit friends said they've done, playing multiple campaigns using the Quiet Year to make their world, and then going on to use a different tabletop RPG system later. I know the popular comedy and fiction podcast, The Adventure Zone, created by the McElroy brothers and their father Clint, great name, they used the Quiet Year in the first 5 episodes of their season titled Ethersea to build the world for their adventure, and then they moved on using Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition for the remainder of the season. Quiet Year is a collaborative strategy and map-based storytelling game. Its purpose is to build out a world by having players draw responses to story prompts about the world on a map, whether that's a physical paper or some type of digital tabletop. It was published by the company Buried Without Ceremony, and the description is as follows. The Quiet Year is a map game. You define the struggles of a community living after the collapse of a civilization and attempt to build something good within their quiet year. Every decision and every action is set against a backdrop of dwindling time and rising concern. The game is played using a deck of cards. Each of the 52 cards corresponds to a week during the quiet year. Each card triggers certain events, bringing bad news, good omens, project delays, and sudden changes in luck. And at the end of the quiet year, the Frost Giants will come, ending the game. The main moves a player takes when it's their turn consists of discussing something new, starting a project, or holding a discussion. The discussing something new is a way that the active player can actually add a new element into the world by drawing it on the map. Maybe they see a strange fog coming out of the nearby body of water. That fog and that body of water should be drawn onto the map by the player. The starting a project move allows players to do something with the elements added to the map. So with the fog and the water, maybe the active player believes that the fog could be dangerous to the community and needs to be explored. They take one 6-sided dice and sit it on the map on or near the fog or body of water. And the number on the dice that they place upward should be equal to how many weeks they believe the project will take. The number on the die will be reduced as time moves on in the game until the project is completed, and the player who started the project will get to determine how that went for the group and update the map accordingly. Now, the last part, holding a discussion, is where the active player gets to make a statement. Example, we should go explore the strange fog, and the other players then get to respond with 1 to 2 sentences based on how they feel. There's no way that another player can stop a project or reverse the actions of another player. However, there is an interesting mechanic called contempt. Players can silently let the active player know if they disagree with an action taken. They use markers, and these markers don't change anything that's been done, but by adding them onto the map, you're letting the active player know that you disagreed with what they're doing. And this adds an element of social consideration. You can choose to keep moving forward with the action certain players at your table disagree with, or you can decide to communicate with the group, hold discussion, and then to decide whether you want to take a different approach. Reddit players recommended that the quiet year is best played with at least 3 or more people. And once again, props and appreciation to Shelby for her review. I'll put a link to it in the show notes if you want to check the whole thing out, and I will dedicate my first quiet year map and world that I build to Shelby. And coming in at number 2 is Fiasco, and I'll be focusing on the second edition of this game, which came in a box set with cards. This game is narrative-driven chaos, and I've run it several times. Moments in this game feel dynamic and cinematic in regards to storytelling. The designer of this game is Jason Morningstar, who is actually active in the r/RPG Reddit community and who actually replied to the question in this thread. He didn't recommend his own game, which shows a sign of humility, but instead offered up 5 games he didn't design, which he loves, that offer GM-less play. So thanks for taking the time to share your top picks, Jason. If anybody wants to go check out Jason's list to the Reddit thread, go and look in the link in the show notes and look for the user JM Star. Now, prior to the 2E box set of Fiasco, which has cards and helps to speed up and streamline the gameplay, the classic version of Fiasco was more of a traditional pen and paper. There is much love for both versions, but like I said, I've only played the one in the box set, so that's the one I'm going to focus on. Hats off to Jared Rasher, who wrote an excellent review on this version of the game for Gnome Stew back in 2020. The link to that review is going to be in the show notes. Jared does a great job laying out the gameplay, and I'm going to try my best to summarize his experience of the gameplay as well as my own. The game is played out in 2 acts plus an aftermath phase. Players assign relationship cards between one another. 2 players receive cards with needs on them. Another receives a location, and others receive objects. Players choose to either establish a scene or resolve a scene. The person resolving the scene determines if it's a positive end or negative end, and the players attempt to then work on the items handed out at the beginning of the game. After playing through the first act, characters total their positive and negative cards and look up the tilt option, which introduces a change in the status quo that needs to be worked out into the narrative. After the second act is played, each player can hand either a negative or a positive card to another player and explain how they helped or hindered the person that received the card in the story. When the cards have all been handed out, characters look at their totals and reference the aftermath cards with the appropriate totals on them. The closer to 0 characters are, the more the characters hold their status quo. The further away from 0, either positive or negative, the more dramatic fortunes shift. The game introduces itself with the following description. During a game, you engineer and play out stupid, disastrous situations, usually at the intersection of greed, fear, and lust. It's like making your own Coen Brothers movie in about the same time it'd take to watch one. Tell cinematic tales of small-time capers gone disastrously wrong, inspired by films like Blood Simple, Fargo, The Way of the Gun, Burn After Reading, and A Simple Plan. You play ordinary people with powerful ambition and poor impulse control. I played 2 different games on 2 different occasions. I used the Tales of Suburbia playset as well as the Dragon Slayers playset, both of which came in the box, and also there was another playset, Poppleton Mall, that I've never played. What struck me about both games was how truly easy it was to make characters and start playing immediately. I vaguely remember one of the players breaking an entry to a house in the suburbs, only to have cops unceremoniously show up. The player jumped into a tree, but it was so obvious that he was in plain sight, it was embarrassing for him. When using the Dragon Slayer playset, I'm pretty sure there was a character who was the Dark Lord of the Sith persona from Star Wars, and another one who was like the apprentice of the Dark Lord of the Sith, and a vigilante automaton who another player was playing to try to bring them both to justice, and all this happened while spelunking in a cavern with, you guessed it, a wild black dragon. If you do not already have the Fiasco box set, this is a must because it's so streamlined and simple. I love to use it as an introduction to role-playing for anyone who's never played a role-playing game before. The game basically holds everyone's hand to perfection. And finally, coming in at number 1, I actually have 2 games. Both were designed by Sean Tompkin, printed by Tompkin Press, and are pieces of art. Well, not modern art, because modern art can be strange, confusing, and open to interpretation. No, these games are beautiful, clear, and open to marvelous storytelling moments. The games I'm raving on about are Ironsworn and its evolution into the sci-fi genre, Ironsworn Starforged. Both of these games have been described as powered by the apocalypse, perfected. Let's begin with Ironsworn, the original. Ironsworn was released in 2018. If you want a fantasy Viking setting, use Ironsworn. A player of Ironsworn takes on the role of a hero sworn to undertake a perilous quest in the dark fantasy setting of the Ironlands. The game has 3 modes of play: solo, by yourself, co-op, which I would also title GM-less, and guided, which means you actually play the game with a GM acting as the facilitator and the moderator, such as you would experience in a normal, traditional GM-led RPG. A big aspect of Ironsworn and also Starforged, which we'll hit on shortly, is the oracles. Oracles are tables or charts which have general ideas or themes or even names on them. And to use the oracle, you roll your dice, get a number, find the number that you rolled on the oracle's table, and that answer fills in the details, or at least begins to fill in the details, to a question that you don't already know the answer to. Think of a magic 8-ball toy. When you asked the ball if you would win $1 million, you shook it up, and the little floating answer dice that was bobbing around in that water would appear at the window of the 8-ball and say, most likely, or probably not. It's a similar concept here. Instead of shaking the 8-ball again, you take the answer that the oracle gave you on the chart, and you apply the interpretation of it to your story. And this process in a GM-led game would be fulfilled through a human game master. The Oracle opens up access for all humans at the table to participate as players in the storytelling experience. So your characters in Ironsworn have stats, and they consist of edge, heart, iron, shadow, and wits. These are your main abilities. You use these abilities, which you assign a score to during character creation, to help you make oaths and complete tasks. As you complete more tasks on your way to completing your sworn vow or your quest, you gain experience, which allows you to gain new assets for your character or upgrade existing ones. An example of an asset might be a special companion, maybe an animal companion or a friend who aids you in combat, or maybe you have non-combat oriented assets like special rituals or natural talents, special gear, unique allies, expert training. You get the idea. The game uses a single 6-sided die, adding either an attribute or another number, and then comparing the two against 2 10-sided dice. An example might be that you're trying to climb a cliff, to reach an eagle's nest of all things, to steal its eggs. Bold move, right? Now, climbing a cliff might use your attribute of iron, which is related to anything involving physical strength or endurance. There are certain moves you can take outlined in the book which determine what you can do in combat and also what you can do during your adventuring or non-combat. Without getting too far into the weeds here, I would say this is a pretty risky move on my part, so I would make the face danger adventure move. And on page 60 of the core rulebook for Ironsworn, if I decided I was rolling my iron attribute here, the number that I would assign during my character creation to iron is what I'll use to modify the roll of my dice. So if I rolled 1d6, one six-sided dice, and then added my number for iron, let's say that my iron is 3, if I roll my 1d6 and I rolled a 5 on the die, I would then add 3 to the 5 that I rolled, and my action score for trying to climb up the cliff and get those eagle's eggs is a score of 8. I am then going to roll my 2 10-sided dice, and here's how my action resolves. If my total action score, 8, is higher than both numbers I roll on my separate d10, then I get what's called a strong hit. I succeed, and usually I'm often granted some type of bonus or advantage in the situation, and this will be determined by the type of move I'm making. And since I was facing danger with the face danger move, this tells me that I am successful, and I take +1 momentum. So I reach the eagle's nest and steal the eagle's egg. Now I'm going to go to my character sheet and I'm going to move my momentum up on my momentum tracker, which we're not going to cover here. You should go get the game. It's really great. There's also a health tracker and a spirit tracker, all of which are taken into account as your hero journeys across the Ironlands. Moving on, let's move on to Ironsworn Starforged, released in 2022. The artwork is beautiful and was completed by Josh Meehan, who was the lead artist for the game. The gameplay here is similar to Ironsworn, except you are a hero that travels through space completing jobs, which you do through ritually swearing vows. Sound familiar? Your character will have a command ship, allowing them to travel from planet to planet, gaining new assets, gaining new gear. There have been some elements added to Ironsworn Starforged that weren't existing in the original Ironsworn game, one of them being safety tools, which have been added to the game to ensure proper reflection for the player or players if an element of the game appears which they don't want to explore during gameplay. And this came up in episode 18 when I was speaking with game designer Ken Haidt about horror games. We talked about the X card and safety tools, ensuring emotional and mental safety at the gaming table. Other elements of Starforged are altered slightly from Ironsworn, such as starship mechanics, how experience is tracked, space exploration, extra assets, as well as a reference guide to navigate the expansive universe of The Forge. And if you want a sci-fi setting in space, which feels like The Mandalorian, use Starforged. It's good for solo play, 2 to 3 players for co-op mode, and if playing 4, it's suggested that players either increase to hard mode with a less generous set of stats, or any more than 4 players, you'd probably either want to play a different game or run it with the GM. So whether it's solo mode or co-op mode, this game, Starforged, and also Ironsworn, came up time and time again as the top pick for GM-less games when we asked the Reddit community. It's versatile, its narrative structure makes it consistently the favorite. In fact, both of these games currently hold a prominent spot at my workstation on my desk for me to gaze upon fondly throughout the day. They are truly that great. Okay, final thoughts. GM burnout and being tired of prepping as a GM for games is a real thing for some people. Maybe you. Definitely for me. And the RPG community rose up and gave us 5 excellent GM-less games that you should consider to add to your next gaming night. And here they are. Number 5, Polaris. Number 4, The Fall of Magic. Number 3, The Quiet Year. Number 2, Fiasco, 2nd edition. And number 1, which I cheated and put 2 up on that pedestal, we have Ironsworn and its cute little baby brother or sister, Ironsworn Starforged. And that's it. That's all I got. Our baking soda volcano has stopped fizzing. Now go out there and play your GM-less games, damn it. Join us next time as we find the best ways to have great times with friends and experience amazing stories through tabletop role-playing. If you are struggling to keep a campaign going, feeling overwhelmed as a GM or don't know how to get started, get personalized guidance to build confidence, create engaging sessions, and manage your group effectively with an absolutely free 15-minute coaching strategy call with me. During our virtual call, I will give you some quick wins, actionable steps, and clear directions you can take away to make your game better. Click on the link in the show notes to schedule your free 15-minute coaching call today. We'll laugh, we'll cry, and we'll make you the big bad evil guy dominating all the other GMs in your path in just 15 minutes. Can't wait to speak with you. I'm ready and raring. Come at me, bro, or sis, or person. All right, I'm done. And may you keep having fun as we continue to make our claim to game.